Welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Edward Russell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jay Shabat, to discuss rising fuel costs and the U.S. outlook for the fall and the competitive environment in Scandinavia. Enjoy. Hey, Jay, how you doing?
Well, I'm good, Ned. Did you enjoy your summer?
I did. We're back after a few weeks off and hopefully rested. It's back to school here in the US and both of our kids are back in classes. So, yeah, what's it's the fall is here.
Yeah, first day of school today. We're talking on Thursday, September 7th. So it's yeah, we're a little bit late in the Northeast, but the kids are back and yeah, vacations are over for most people and airlines are starting to attend investor conferences again. So we know the fall is here.
That's right. That's right. September always kicks off with a few investor conferences, and this week, TD Cowen held their conference, and we had a couple of airlines talk. There, United, Alaska, and a few others. Jay, what were the highlights coming out of that?
Yeah, well, at this point, I listened to United's call, and let me before even discussing the presentations, Alaska, Southwest, and United, the three of them issued investor updates through the Securities and Exchange Commission, and here's basic. I'm going to tell you basically what they said. The common theme here is that fuel prices are up and to a degree that's somewhat uncomfortable. And so each of these airlines kind of revised their cost guidance to say, hey, look, fuel is not quite as inexpensive as we thought it might be. So, be careful, watch out for our third quarter unit cost. So there's that. Now, Southwest did mention that, and I'm looking for the exact quote here. August 2023 close-in leisure bookings were on the lower end of the company's expectations, modestly
Okay.
impacted by seasonal trends. Now they also said overall leisure demand and yields continue to remain healthy, and that travel demand during Labor Day weekend was strong. Blah blah blah. So record revenue performance for the holiday weekend. So I don't think there's anything to be too alarmed about here. It's and then in United's presentation, nothing really alarming there. So see, everything seems to be pretty good on the demand front.
Yeah.
So the only thing of concern at this point is that increase in fuel prices. I think that's where the concern lies so far.
Right. And I was looking at those same updates as you, and something as they've been raising fuel guidance, and it's up definitely a few percentage points, 13% on average. Alaska, that's brought in some of the margin guidance. Alaska also cut its margin outlook, but they're still within the range they gave for the third quarter. It's just brought them down from maybe the high end of their margin guidance to the midpoint. So airlines are still doing quite well. It's just maybe not as well as they thought in July.
Yeah, and for the just to put some numbers on, so Alaska, I believe, was the only one that actually revised their margin estimate. So there, and this is they're giving a pre-tax adjusted pre-tax margin. They previously said 14% to 16%. They're now saying 10 to 12. So that's a rather significant drop, and most of that is linked to the higher fuel prices. I mean, that's pretty clear. They actually the revenue guidance was actually pretty good. They originally said it was going to be up 0 to 3%. Now they say up 1 to 2%, which is essentially the same thing. You just kind of narrowed it a little bit. Nothing negative there. I guess the only other thing that I would say that's somewhat of a common theme across the three airlines that gave their updates. Weather in July, we've heard all the headlines about the hurricanes and what happened in Hawaii and all of that. That was somewhat cost disruptive as well. So if you want to, kind of put that in its own category alongside fuel, that was somewhat of a, headwind too. But they also
For sure.
most
And we before we go on, I just want to point out United and Alaska are two of the largest airlines to Maui, which was affected by the fires.
right.
So it's Yeah, after Hawaiian, I think they're 2 and 3. So it's yeah, definitely there's an impact there, and of course the storm that hit California and all kinds of things. So there's some weather impact in there.
Right, right. And they did say, I mean, United, in particular, their CFO, who spoke at the Cowen event with Helene Becker, did specifically mention that, yes, July there were disruptions, but then I have the quote in front of me here. In fact, August for us operationally was probably the best August since the merger. And he's referring back to 2010 when United merged with Continental. So I think operations, aside from those weather disruptions, pretty things are going pretty well. And I've generally heard that from other airlines as well. It hasn't been too, non-weather. It's a big factor, so you can't really put it aside. But
Right.
for the record, it's I think things are operationally pretty sound ex weather.
Right. Did they talk about corporate travel? Is there any movement there on that coming back? We talked about that in July. It sort of plateaued here in the U.S. and there's was hope we might see something new come the fall. But any chat about that?
Now, from my recollections, that did not come up in the discussion.
Ah, well, that is something we'll have to wait and see. One another thing that jumped out at me, especially in United's call, is not sure listeners are following it, but United recently purchased a large tract of land near the Denver International Airport. Sort of it's an empty plot. I've driven by it on Pena, the road that goes into the airport, and they were asked if they're looking to move their headquarters from Chicago to Denver, which would be a huge shift. It's Chicago's been the home of United for not sure forever, but for decades. But they said that their CFO Jerry Laderman, said that they have no imminent plans to move the headquarters, and he cited the training center. Of course, the training center is over by the old airport, Stapleton. I'm a Colorado kid, so I remember Stapleton fondly, even if it was operationally a mess. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But no imminent plans for United to relocate their headquarters.
Right, that topic was addressed in the presentation. Thought that was interesting. So looks like there are no plans to move from Chicago, at least not for now, or at least nothing disclosed. But yeah, that's I found that interesting. Denver, by the way, is just becoming this like superstar airport and superstar market. I mean, it's almost taking on the aura of an Atlanta or a Dallas. Just this huge mid-continent hub that in the past was never really that large of a market, and it was always a good hub, but it was always one that United. There was a time United, I think, struggled there because there was so much low cost competition. Southwest is there, Frontier is there. It was also, it's not the population size. It's not a huge market, but it's growing really fast. And it's even, it was also a place where you couldn't really support too much international traffic. Even that's starting to change. I mean, I was just in Denver last month, and you look at the the airport schedule board, and you see flights to Iceland and Panama, and plenty to Europe and Tokyo. It's becoming more international.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me is as I look at the growth of Denver, and we wrote about this, or I wrote about this in August, sort of Denver and DFW are closely vying for the second busiest airport in the U.S. Title for the year, though it looks like DFW will win. But Denver, if you look at the traffic growth there, it's really been on connecting traffic. The numbers for people going through security at the airport are about flat to maybe up a point or two from 2019, but it's the connecting traffic that United is funneling through there, Southwest is funneling through there, and I know people are going to tell me Southwest doesn't do connections, but oh, they do.
Oh, they do, yeah. They
Oh
for sure
yes,
do.
oh they do, and that is really driving the massive growth in Denver. The airport just added 35-ish new gates and all their concourses. It's really a sight to see. It really makes me remember the days when people were calling it a white elephant too far from the city and stuff when it opened back in 1995. But it's really come into its own.
It is pretty darn far from the city, though, as I learned last month when I went out there. But yeah, great airport, and kind of has that. One of the things, Atlanta. Well, but there's so many reasons why Atlanta's the busiest airport in the world. But one of them is that you have all these smallish, medium-sized cities throughout the southeast that can't really support a lot of their own nonstop traffic. So it all has to get funneled in through somewhere, and so much of it goes through Atlanta, and then kind of the competing sort of I like to call Charlotte the baby Atlanta, the mini Atlanta. So you really have those two. Well, it's kind of in the West. You have a very similar dynamic with, Denver. You have all these, smallish places in the Mountain West that are poorly connected by roads. And so you have to fly to get anywhere. And
Mhm.
just so much of that gets funneled through Denver. And then sort of the, Charlotte analogy. So continuing my poor Charlotte analogy here, Salt Lake City would be really the baby Denver.
I
It's
was gonna
really,
say exactly
yeah,
that. Like, if Charlotte is the baby Atlanta, Salt Lake City is the baby Denver.
there's
And let's
baby
not
Denver.
discount Salt Lake City. They've a gorgeous new terminal there. The airport is growing, but it's not Denver. That's for sure.
I wonder if the Salt Lake City tourism folks are gonna steal that from us, like as a marketing thing. Like we are baby Denver, come visit us. Or
Well,
I don't
here's a
think so.
throwback, Jay. I don't know if you know this or remember this, but Western Airlines in the 1980s, and of course they merged with Delta in '87, so it's years ago. They used to market their Salt Lake City hub as the fastest in the West because old Stapleton Airport was prone for delays. It was in the city, couldn't expand. Weather would hit, and so yeah, Salt Lake City used to use their their competitive advantage was we're smaller and you can connect here a lot faster than other places. So
There you go,
maybe
baby
that'll
Salt,
maybe that'll come back.
baby Denver. Yeah, and who was Western CEO back in the back at that time was Jerry Grinstein, who went on to run Delta Airlines and during their bankruptcy restructuring. So like it all comes around.
It certainly does. It certainly does. Well, Jay, let's take a quick break, and we're gonna hop across the Atlantic and talk a bit about what's happening in Scandinavia. And we're back. So, like I was saying, Jay, we're going to take a transatlantic flight and land in Scandinavia, where SAS and Norwegian Air both reported their results in the last few weeks. Jay, can you give us the highlights?
Yes, I have some numbers for you. So let's do SAS first. They actually, for the first time in a very long time, had what you might describe as a very good quarter, or at least a solid quarter. They earned a 12% operating margin from, and I want to be careful with the, listen carefully to the months here. This was from May to July. So they operated on a very strange fiscal calendar, but May, June, July, those 3 months. Now, those, keep in mind, those are, three of the very strongest months of the year.
Right.
So, if you want to argue 12% is not really that impressive. I mean, IAG did 16% from April to June, which are, a little bit of a weaker subset of months. Ryanair, would they do 19%? So, 12% is not lighting the world on fire. But look, I mean, you know, this is an airline that's in bankruptcy. It's had an awful lot of trouble. So I think they're happy with 12%. Now let's move over
Yeah.
to Norwegian. Norwegian, they for the traditional April to June, so April, May, and June, 10%. So also pretty good quarter. And the name of the name of the game when you're operating in the Nordic region, and this is true for a lot of cold weather, airlines operating in cold weather places. The name of the game is you gotta kind of run up the score in the spring and summer because you're going to lose money in the winter, or at best you may make a little money. But is this going to be enough? Is these 12%, 10% margins is maybe not. I mean, a lot depend will be on the third quarter, which is traditionally the best quarter of all for these guys. So it's I think they're sitting in a position right now where there's a fighting chance that they could have a pretty good year in 2023. We'll see. We'll see just how bad the winter is.
Right, and they both did very well. I mean, they both reported strong profits. SAS, one thing that jumped out is, of course, they said this is their first quarterly profit since 2019, the pandemic, and then they've been in their bankruptcy restructuring. But it's interesting, like you said. So they're running up their profits, and at Norwegian, their CEO Geir Carlson said they plan to do the same thing they did last year, which is pull down capacity significantly this winter. I didn't see much or hear much in the call about fly power by the hour agreements, which they had in place for last winter, but I'm assuming it's going to be something similar to that. But yeah, the competitive market in Scandinavia is fascinating. You've got Norwegian Air growing Their loyalty program is now larger than SAS's, based on recent data. They're trying to acquire Widerøe, a Norwegian regional airline, and they say they're taking corporate share in Norway. But when SAS was asked about that, their CEO Enko van der Werf said, they're basically unconcerned, and he cited the fact that Norway remains their largest market, and that they have about half the slots. I'm guessing in Oslo. He didn't really explain, but it's interesting. It's you've got one person saying they're growing, another telling investors that they're just fine. Of course, you wouldn't expect him to tell them that things are terrible and oh my gosh, run for the hills. But it's there's sort of two stories there, and I'm still very curious how this all falls out.
Yeah, and there's still some questions too that Widerøe transaction will be approved by antitrust regulators. I'm sure we'll find that out before long.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the Norwegian restructuring, they did a very thorough restructuring in bankruptcy and got rid of all. I mean, this was one of the most recklessly ambitious airlines in the world for the better part of a decade. And when they declared bankruptcy during the pandemic, they did a really good job of I think of restructuring their costs. And I mean, you mentioned the power by hour agreements is one example of what they did. They've just got better lease rates, better deal with Boeing. And they also, as you mentioned, they're going to pull down capacity for the winter. They're going to do even more of that this year than last year. And there's a risk to that because when when you're not utilizing your planes, when you're letting them sit on the ground, that's not very good for your unit cost, for your productivity. But their argument is that, hey, look, I mean, we better off doing that than flying empty planes around in the winter, and nobody wants to go to Oslo and it's negative 10 degrees or whatever. So better do that, or burn fuel up in the sky with nobody on board. So they seem to be well positioned now. SAS is still going through their bankruptcy, and it's a little bit harder to renegotiate things like aircraft leases right now because the aircraft market's so strong, so lessors are not as willing to do deals. They seem to be progressing though. They seem to be getting coming along with that, and I believe they said that they, correct me if I'm wrong, that I maybe memory misserves me here, but I believe they aim to be out of bankruptcy by the end of this year.
By
I
the
think
end of
they
this
said
year,
that.
that's right. But they
Yeah, okay.
said, I mean, for the record, they're behind on their timelines. When they filed in July 2022, they said 9 to 12 months. July has come, come and gone, and they're now saying by the end of the year. At anyone's guess is if they hit it or not. I've followed enough bankruptcies to know that these things can drag on. Yeah, and part of van der Werf's outlook and his confidence in SAS's ability is completing bankruptcy, and that's at least 6 months. Well, it's not 6 months off, but the benefits of bankruptcy are about 6 months off at this point, and it just makes you wonder. I mean, that's more time for Norwegian to build up share in Norway. Ryanair has announced a new base in Copenhagen, which is
Yikes. Yikes.
SAS's largest hub by flights, second largest by seats. Just depends on how you cut it. Um, Ryanair is coming in there. Van der Werf said that they're seeing some cuts in some secondary markets as Ryanair grows, but I pulled the DO data, and I'm not seeing any cuts through the end of the year. I mean, they're growing across the board, really. So it's going to be interesting. The
Interesting.
longer SAS struggles, the more time these competitors have the opportunity to really dig their heels in some of these markets.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that concerns me about SAS is I have a feeling as I look at these, these numbers that I just said, the 12% operating margin from May to July. You have to believe a lot of that was emanated from very strong long haul, just long haul demand and just the situation on transatlantic routes right now. I assume even some stuff going eastbound, even some of the stuff affected by Russian overflights, even that stuff I think is doing very well. I mean, there's some cargo on that and whatever, but and the yields are just very high. I mean, so much capacity is being eliminated between Europe and places like China, for example. So I think I think they got a big boost from that this summer.
Yeah.
But does that last? I mean, is this that's a big question for them. Traditionally SAS is really the majority of their capacity is in short haul because I mean, let's face it, they have three sort of undersized hubs. I mean, Copenhagen, Oslo, Stockholm, even, they've played around in Helsinki. I mean, these are hubs that can't really support that much, intercontinental traffic. So ultimately, at the end of the day, they really need to learn how to make money from short haul. And traditionally, it's that's one of the reasons why they've struggled for more than a decade now. It's one of the reasons is because short haul is so difficult when you're competing with Norwegian and Ryanair, et cetera, EasyJet, and so on. How much has that situation really changed? Maybe it has. I mean, maybe some of the things they're doing in bankruptcy is going to allow them to be more cost competitive with the LCCs. I think a big question in the past, they've sort of held their own in the corporate/business market because they offer things like, their Euro bonus program and lounges, et cetera.
But I
Is
want
that
to point out,
still?
Norwegian
Yeah.
Rewards is becoming a
Yes.
much more attractive option. Yes,
Correct.
Euro
Correct.
bonus has Star Alliance, so you get that global network, but Norwegian Rewards, they just relaunched the program. There's new tiers that are, Geir Carlson has said, is targeting corporate travelers. They have a new partnership with Strawberry, which is a hotel group in Scandinavia. They're working with, they've just signed up a new credit card deal with a Scandinavian bank. So Norwegian Rewards is doing a lot to grow and be attractive to those customers. So
Yep.
I wouldn't say Euro bonus is, Euro bonus watch out is what I would say.
Well, I was going to say, right? I mean, yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say that Norwegian is kind of muscling in on some of the areas where SAS was traditionally had, where they traditionally had a competitive advantage, like the loyalty program. Norwegian investing a lot of that. Also with Widerøe, they're going to these regional markets where they used to, be absent. And Widerøe has a lot of corporate contracts with, the Norwegian Defense Department, or I'm just making that up, but they, so they're kind of encroaching on SAS's, where they're their bread and butter area. So it's not going to be easy for SAS, but yeah, well, they're certainly taking strides to make themselves more competitive in bankruptcy. No
Absolutely. And
doubt.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we'll be watching. We're always here for a good comeback story, but it's,
Yeah.
just saying, SAS has plenty of challenges ahead of it, even as it works to come out of bankruptcy. And I'm trying, here it is. I was just looking. The number, so Norwegian, actually, speaking of their short haul operations, I believe they're operating more short haul aircraft today than they were in 2019. I can't find the exact number here. But they're up to about 80 aircraft this summer. They're going to go up to 90 next summer, and they're growing. They shed their long haul, and they're definitely doubling down on that short haul flying.
Yeah, and they also mentioned interestingly in their call that they're very interested in the 737 Max 10 now. At first, they were concerned that it didn't have the range to do markets like Oslo to the Canary Islands. That's rather longish stage length. But Boeing came back to them and said, no, we can, we'll make sure that this plane will be able to handle that. So that would be that would say 225 people in Norwegian's configuration. Awesome, unit cost profile for that. So that could be a really good aircraft for them. The only final thing, I know we've kind of beaten this horse to death here, but there's only so much you can talk about the Nordics without putting people to sleep. But the only other thing that I think is important to the story that we haven't mentioned yet is that some of the Nordic currencies have been very weak, and that's been a big challenge for both SAS and Norwegian, because suddenly that increased your, anything you're buying in US dollars becomes more expensive. So the first thing you think about is fuel, but also aircraft, and makes you perhaps doesn't really affect labor so much, but in other costs, that's been an issue, and both companies, they talked about it, they mentioned it in their calls.
Yeah. So we'll be watching closely. With that, Jay, I think we're going to bring this episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge to a wrap. Listeners, if you want to reach us, you can reach me at er@skift.com. You can reach Jay at js@skift.com. Jay, it's always a pleasure.
Likewise, Ned. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. Check out airlineweekly.com for a new issue every Monday and updates on the latest airline news throughout the week.